Like a lot of people, I started making sourdough during the pandemic, but I found the original method I was using was a bit of a pain because of the kneading process. I would sometimes just never get it right, and it was always kind of a mixed bag whether or not it was going to work. So when I started doing this new method, which I would call a no-knead process, I found the loaves came out pretty much perfect every single time. So now you're gonna need a sourdough starter to get started on this. So just look on social media and ask friends and family if they have one. Otherwise, you're gonna have to Google how to make your own. This is my sourdough. And as you can see, I don't keep very much of it. It's a really, really small amount. And so what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna feed this equal amounts of flour and water. I need 100 grams of starter when I make my bread tomorrow. So I'm gonna feed this with 50 grams of whole wheat flour, 50 grams of water, stir it together, and then I'm gonna stick this elastic to where it mixed up nicely because I wanna see that this has doubled before I use it. So last night before I went to bed, I fed my starter. Oh, it's the tang. You'll know the smell. You know if it's rising properly because it just has this delicious, delicious tang. This elastic shows you where the starter was before, and then it rose up to here, and it started to fall a little bit this morning, but that's okay because I still have double, and it's still nice and bubbly. Baking is all about hydration levels, and for my loaf, I like to have 10% less liquid than I have flour. So for example, if I was using 100 grams of flour, I would want 90 grams of water. In this particular recipe, I'm using 450 grams of flour, but I'm also gonna add in 10 grams of sea salt. So I'm just gonna mix that into the flour before. So I've already measured out the water, but this is where we also get to see how well our sourdough starter is doing. So we're gonna take out just a little bit and do what we call a float test. That means it's happy and it's good to go. So now we just add enough to bring us up to 100 grams. Bubbly goodness. This is what's left inside my sourdough for next time. That's all I need. So I will just feed this the next time I make sourdough, and then it's good to go. So now I'm gonna just quickly just do a little mix and mix together my water and my sourdough. Now I'm gonna pour this into the flour and just stir it around until it's a nice shaggy ball. Again, we don't have to knead this. This took me maybe a minute to form into this little shaggy ball. The trick is just try to get all the flour in there. And as you can see, I've got this nice little shaggy ball. It's not kneaded, there's little pieces hanging off of it. So what I'm gonna do now is put an airtight seal on this, but also sometimes I'll just put a plate over top of it. And what I'm gonna do is leave this for anywhere from half an hour to an hour. And then we're gonna come back and we're gonna do a stretch and fold, which is kind of like kneading and it helps activate the gluten, but it's not nearly as intensive and it's sort of foolproof. So this has been sitting for about 45 minutes, and as you can see, it's still a little bit shaggy, but as I pull it up, you can see that it's starting to stretch beautifully. And that means the gluten strands are starting to form. What we're gonna do is we're gonna go around this about 3 times, and it's really just a series of just what I call stretch and folds. And it's just pulling it up and moving it around over and over again, just kind of like quarter turns. And what you're gonna notice starting to happen is it's gonna start forming like a nice little shape that's sort of round, but it's still not a perfect ball the way you would see with kneading. And then just when it's all done like this, I'm just gonna turn it upside down and you're gonna see a nice little ball shape. So now what we're gonna do is we're gonna cover this back up. We're gonna leave it for half an hour. And then we're gonna come back and I'm just gonna do one stretch and fold, quarter turn it, another stretch and fold until I go all the way around. Flip it over, leave it, come back in a half an hour and do that one more time. Then I'm gonna cover this up and leave it for at least 4 hours, but you can leave it up to 6 or 8 if you're going away for the rest of the day. And then we're gonna come back and I'll show you what we're doing then. Look at how much that is poofed up just by sitting. Remember, we didn't really need this. All we did was a series of stretch and folds, and look at that. It has a nice springiness to it and bounce back. So we're just gonna sprinkle a fair amount of flour all over our bench here. We're gonna gently take this dough out, and what we need to do is punch the air out of it so it won't be as puffy as it is right now. And what we want to do is just kind of push the air of it a bit. Put a little flour on your fingers if it's sticky, but you don't want to add too much flour because you want that stickiness. So all I'm going to do is just pull that out. Then I'm just going to do one more stretch and fold all the way around. Oh, it's like a pillow. See all these bubbles forming? You know that the gas inside of this thing is working. It is beautiful. So we're just going to fold that all over into itself, plop it upside down. Look at these bubbles. Oh, that lets you know that the sourdough is doing its thing. So now we're just going to take that extra flour we had around here and just cup our hands and just tuck it around into itself. We're just going to do this, create a nice little ball shape for it, and then we're going to let it sit on the counter for about another half an hour, and then we're just going to cover it with a towel. After this, we're gonna shape it, and I wanna put it into an oval shape. So what I'm gonna do is stretch it out into it's a bit of a square. I'm gonna fold it over into itself on both sides, and then we're gonna just roll it up into itself, and then we're gonna pull both edges over as best we can. We're gonna take our banneton, lightly dust it with brown rice flour. We're gonna flip it upside down and press the dough into itself so it starts to reconnect. Then we're gonna put our shapen dough inside of it upside down and put it in the fridge and let it sit overnight. So this has been sitting overnight inside the fridge, and now it's ready to go. I preheat the oven at 500 degrees Fahrenheit with my Dutch oven inside of it. It's cast iron, and that holds the heat beautifully. I've also got a baking sheet inside of there because I find that it helps absorb the heat. Otherwise, sometimes the loaf can burn a bit on the bottom. So now what we're going to do is we're gonna take the loaf out of the banneton, and then we're gonna take a little brush and just brush off that excess rice flour that was on there. And then we're gonna take a lame. A lame is this guy. It's one of those razor knife things. If you don't have one of these, you could just use a really, really sharp knife. You can do this just for pure artistic reasons to make it look pretty, but really you're doing this so the bread can expand and rise and get that oven spring where the loaf will kind of open up and create what's called an ear. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna slice it down here along the side. And you kind of want to do this quickly. And I'm just gonna do 3 slits along the top here. And you can already see that this is starting to spread out and expand. We're gonna take this very hot pan, and we're gonna transfer this inside and make sure it doesn't touch the sides. Push the parchment away from it as much as you can. We'll cover it up. And this is gonna bake for 20 minutes at 500 degrees. And then what we're gonna do is we're gonna just take the lid off and let it cook for another 10 to 15 minutes, depending on how dark you want the loaf to be. Look at that. That's the ear that they refer to in baking, where the bread just opens up. And that's just from that little slit we made with the lame. And you've got those beautiful slits on top. And the real test to make sure it's baked all the way through properly is to knock on it. And that lets you know that it has baked perfectly. So you're gonna be really tempted to just cut into this right away, but if you do that, the bread is gonna be gummy. So unless you're gonna devour the whole thing as soon as it comes out of the oven, you're gonna wanna let it sit for at least an hour and come down to room temperature. Look at that delicious crumb. The crumb is the little holes inside. Nothing smells as good as fresh baked sourdough. This is just a whole wheat loaf. If you're using a little bit of white flour, it might rise a bit more, but I love it just as it is, and it's still nice and soft and squishy. This is amazing used for sandwiches or toast. If you spread a little bit of plant-based butter on there, or dip it in some olive oil and some good balsamic vinegar, there's so many different ways you can eat this, and each way is delicious. This is a super simple, no-knead sourdough bread.